Dark Spyro is an interesting character in the story of the Spyro franchise, but his lore and overall story gets even more interesting and complicated as time goes on. Let's talk about it.
Whoa!
What's up guys, Canadian Guy here, and back with something that's a little bit different. YouTube released a brand new tool that basically tells me what you guys have been looking up, and in that tool, I saw apparently you guys are looking up Dark Spyro. So I thought, what the heck, let's do a video about Dark Spyro. When we get to the overall story of Spyro, things actually get a little bit complicated. We have the original games, then the game was rebooted in the Legend of Spyro series, and then the character, not the franchise, was rebooted and migrated to the Skylanders franchise. But the weird thing about Spyro himself, as a character, he gains aspects of lore that sometimes carries through the reboots and migrations. This is kind of a weird thing to do in regards of IP. So today, we're going to talk about Dark Spyro, where we first discovered him, what this form is, the history it has, and how it could affect future titles in the Spyro franchise. Alright, first things first, Dark Spyro did not show up at all in the original Spyro trilogy, but there is something interesting that might have some ties to it. In Spyro, A Hero's Tale, throughout the levels there are these dark gems that are corrupting the land around them, causing the dark energy to drain the area of life and spread the corruption. Think of it like a poisonous battery. Now, while this has no connection at all at this point to Dark Spyro, the dark gem and dark energies within it possibly do connect to a piece of lore that carries over to where we first see Dark Spyro, which is in the first reboot of the franchise, The Legend of Spyro. Now, in this new take on the franchise, dark gems actually do migrate over from A Hero's Tale. This time, they absorb magic from around them and power the Dark Master's creatures, like the Destroyer. But whom is the Dark Master? Well, I'm glad you asked. In The Legend of Spyro, it has a legend that talks about a purple dragon. It says that every single 10 generations, a purple dragon is born. Now, a purple dragon can master multiple elements, unlike their regular dragon counterparts. They're meant to lead the dragons to a new age, and are very important to dragon culture. And, just as the legend foretold, a purple dragon by the name of Malefor was born. In summary, the Dragon Elders at the time knew that Malefor was of great importance, but the legend never mentioned the fact that the Purple Dragon could master multiple elements. You think that was important to mention? First, he mastered fire, which was weird because he wasn't a fire dragon. At this point, the Elders were curious about what else he could learn and taught him everything they knew to nurture his power. However, Malefor's hunger became insatiable. His power was, according to the chronicler, limitless. Soon, Malefor's strength grew beyond the control of the Dragon Elders, and he did not intend to stop. So, the Dragon Elders cast him out of the Dragon Sanctuary. Malefor grew bitter, spiteful, and angry that the Elders would cast him out after they themselves nurtured this power. This caused Malefor to turn to what he believed was the ultimate power. He assembled an army of, apes and created a base in the distant mountains. Here is where Malefor decided to master the element that none of the other Dragon Elders could or would teach, Dark Aether. It is unclear what Dark Aether 100% is, as the lore around it can get quite murky. But I will say, Lore the Dragon does a great job in explaining it. So after this video is done, go check out his stuff. But for the sake of time, Aether or convexity is essentially pure magic. When Aether comes into contact with a purple dragon, it gives them immense power. However, if it's corrupted by anything, that corruption completely takes them over and it turns into Dark Aether. This, of course, was completely okay to a power-hungry maniac who has zero regards to any sort of life. Alright, fast forward to the events of the second Legend of Spyro game. The whole point of the game is that the Eternal Night, a celestial lunar event that happens every couple hundred years, was being used to rip the veil between dimensions to bring back Malefor. At the end of the game, when you finally defeat the general of the ape army, Gaul, the lunar event begins and dark Aether begins to pour out from beneath Spyro and Gaul, releasing Malefor. However, Spyro accidentally came in contact with this energy and became the very first appearance of what we now call Dark Spyro. Gaul laughs at Spyro as he thinks he won because Malefor had finally been brought back. Spyro answered by, literally evaporating Gaul. It's like Cell versus Gohan all over again. But then, Cinder shows up, gives her half-baked written lines, Spyro snaps out of his dark form because... plot. And then, when the area around them starts to cave in, Spyro just decides to reveal that he can put him, Cinder, and Joe Dirt the Fly into a crystal stasis. Were we shown this before? Did we know this was a thing? No and no. In the next game, we find out that Spyro and Cinder went through puberty while in a crystal stasis. Wait, what's the definition of a stasis again? A period of state of inactivity, a stoppage of body fluid. But if they're in stasis, how could they... Anyway, basically Spyro and friends wake up years later, with Malefor seemingly overwhelming the world. It's now up to Spyro and Cinder to forcibly partner up and fight the Dark Master. This game might be the climax of the reboot, but sadly we only see Dark Spyro show up very briefly one time. Later in the game, Ignitus sacrifices himself to save Spyro and Cinder so that they can continue on their journey. Spyro, understandably, is upset as Ignitus was basically a father figure to him, and briefly gives in to the darkness, becoming Dark Spyro. For approximately 10 seconds. Cinder gives him one of the worst emotionally backed set of lines that I've ever heard in a video game, and he settles down and returns to normal. Great, awesome, 10 out of 10. But what you should notice though, is that Spyro turned into Dark Spyro without touching Dark Aether, meaning that he still has that dark energy flowing through him, and that he has to keep it in check, otherwise it will take over him like it took over Malefor. Now, we move on to the next Spyro. Well, not a reboot, but more like a migration. Skylanders, the toy-to-life game that a lot of diehard Spyro fans hated at first, who now is pretty much indifferent towards, at least they should be. Now, Skylanders lore is not quite as, well, deep as some would like, but there is some tidbits to be gleaned. So, Skylands is basically protected by what's called the Core of Light. It fills the Skylands with light and keeps the darkness at bay. According to different tidbits of story from the game, darkness attempted to corrupt the Core of Light. Spyro went to go stop it and, of course, save the day. But something weird happened. As the darkness touched him, his scales turned black as night and his golden horns turned silver. The darkness began to corrupt Spyro. See, Spyro was a purple dragon, and because of that, he could possess the power of any element he wanted, just like the Legend of Spyro iteration. However, while he could adapt to any element of his choosing, this left him susceptible to corruption. Think of him like a sponge. He just absorbs magic, whether it be good or bad. So, Master Eon, the Portal Master and leader of the Skylands, cast a multitude of spells on Spyro to prevent him from being completely taken over by the darkness. Over time, Spyro learned to master the dark magic and hold control over it, being able to wield it when he needed to without falling to it. Which, interestingly, ties into Dawn of the Dragon, where we learn that Spyro still has that darkness within him. Now, we move on to Skylanders Academy. Now, the creators of this show have stated that the show is not canon, as in it didn't really happen in the Skylanders story or lore when it comes to video games. But there is something interesting that I noticed in later games and other cameos, so I promise I will not waste your time with this information. So I'm going to summarize this season really quickly. Spyro wanted to find more of his kind and wanted to figure out where he came from. So on his adventures, he would eventually find Cadaverous Crypts, which is the location of Malefor. Remember him? Except instead of seemingly being a spiky purple dragon, he kind of just looks like Deathwing from Warcraft. Anyway, He traps Spyro and holds him for ransom, telling the Skylanders that he wants his daughter Cinder to return to him. Psst, by the way, yeah, Cinder comes back to Skylanders as well. But of course, him being the villain and somehow no one seeing it coming, even though they go to fulfill the ransom, he decides to just hold on to Spyro. Until Chaos, the main villain of the entire franchise, shows up and basically demands Malefor to hand Spyro over to him. Chaos claims that he comes in the name of Strykor, whom he reveals is, well, his father. For some reason, Malefor just goes, okay, sure, and hands Spyro over. Spyro's energy is then sapped and used to release Strykor from this dark dimensional prison, and the husk that's left behind is, well, Dark Spyro. Now, Dark Spyro was sent back to the Skylands by Strykor to spy on his fellow Skylanders and report their movements back to him. Over time though, Spyro started to show that Strykor didn't have as much control on him as he initially thought, which caused Strykor to tighten his grip on Spyro. Spyro's friends realized that something had to be done, and Pop Fizz concocts a potion to return Spyro back to his normal self. After Spyro drinks it, he returns back to his purpley self. However, there was a bit of a side effect. Dark Spyro and regular Spyro were now two completely separate entities, one of good and one of evil. They begin their fight and basically end in a Kamehameha and Big Bang collision. There's a big explosion, people cry, Spyro shows up, life is good. But Dark Spyro is seemingly gone. I'm sure that's left open for, well, plot reasons. So we move out from Skylanders Academy, and now we've come full circle back to after Spyro reignited, returning Spyro to his platforming roots. However, Dark Spyro would show up as a character in an adjacent IP, Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. CTR had Grand Prix where one of the characters was, yes, Spyro. Now, like most games like CTR today, skins and other cosmetics are included for all characters, including our favorite purple boy. One of those skins was, yes, you guessed it, Dark Spyro. But what's interesting as well is that this is not just Black Spyro, like as if you punched in cheat codes in Spyro Reignited. The silver horns and other coloration shows that this skin is in reference to the dark form that he takes from the Skylander series and not the Legend series. But of course, this is a racing game and there's no lore to be had. But there is more. 2 years later, Crash on the Run, a mobile game that is an endless runner, brought in an event that featured Spyro, Dark Spyro, and Nasty Nork. Of course, there is very little plot in this mobile game, but we learned that in this game, Dark Spyro was sealed away somewhere and somehow was released. It is alleged that Nasty Nork released him, so he teams up with Nasty Nork and races through a corrupted dragon portal and shows up to the Crash Bandicoot realm, but we'll get to that in a second. Then Spyro had chased after him into the Crash on the Run dimension. From this point, Dark Spyro plans to take over this new dimension because, well, evil plans. Now, in the area that you actually face Spyro and send him back to the dimension where he came from, there are banners all over the place that are filled to the brim with dark Aether symbols. These symbols date back all the way to the Legend of Spyro series, so seeing these come up here is quite interesting. But notice how there are now two Spyros, one regular and one dark. This didn't become a plot point until Skylanders Academy, which is why we went through it. Not only that, but the dragon portal that Nasty and Dark Spyro came from is surrounded by dark gems, emitting a chaotic and dark energy, causing it to corrupt the portal with evil energy. That in turn swings us back all the way to Spyro A Hero's Tale, where we started, where we find the dark gems and makes this whole concept come full circle. But the history of Dark Spyro is very interesting. Each take on darkness and evil in the Spyro franchise somehow migrates part of what is established in the previous version of Spyro into the newer version. The Dark Gems in Hero's Tale was the start. This turned into Dark Gems and Dark Aether in Legend of Spyro, which then introduced Dark Spyro. Then Dark Spyro is brought back again in Skylanders, following the same previous concepts of a purple dragon being able to use all elements, but changed his look to black and silver. Then, in Skylanders Academy, Dark Spyro is here again, but this time introduces the concept of there being two Spyros after Pop Fizz splits them. And then, Crash on the Run introduces Dark Spyro, but brings along the concept that there are now two Spyros, a plot point from Skylanders Academy, and then points to Dark Gems corrupting the Dragon Portal, which connects back to both the original Spyro trilogy and A Hero's Tale. This, thus far, is the historical and kind of summary of Dark Spyro's involvement in the franchise, and I hope to see him somewhere in the future in perhaps another Spyro title. We will just have to see.